Welcome to ICN Sunday Morning. I'm Vernon Loeb, Executive Editor. Let's talk about data centers. These are the giant server farms that run 24/7, suck up massive amounts of electricity, require lots of water to cool, and emit a loud, persistent hum that drives neighbors crazy. There's a rush to build these all over the country to power AI, crypto mining, and cloud computing. And with the change in the White House, the push to power them with renewable energy is gone. I'll be joined this morning by Lee Hedgepeth, who covers Alabama for us. His recent story about the development of a hyperscale data center in Bessemer, Alabama, in the piney woods outside Birmingham, went viral online. Lee, thanks for joining me.
Of course, glad to be here.
Yeah. So I know you worked on this piece with Lanier Isom, who's a freelancer who works with us in Birmingham. How did you guys find out about what was happening in Bessemer?
So, a lot of the residents were being very vocal about their opposition to this project. So, early on in the process, there were some zoning changes that were necessary to kind of start the ball rolling on the part of the government for this project. And all of the residents who lived around this area where the proposed site of the data center is were just being very vocal, were showing up to these zoning meetings and expressing their opposition. And so we saw that happening and wanted to go talk to the residents and see what the details of this project actually were.
Yeah. One of the striking things about this is this use of non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. Apparently, all the local politicians there had been asked to sign them and had signed them. And this is a feature of data center development, it seems, in many other states as well. So what's going on with all this secrecy?
Yeah, so we were kind of shocked to find out that the city attorney, a lot of the economic development folks here in Jefferson County, where the development is proposed, have signed these non-disclosure agreements. And so we talked to folks, experts on data centers, who said that these are pretty common. But obviously, the folks on the ground here, the residents whose homes would be impacted by this construction, are very upset that their public officials not only signed these NDAs, but now are using those NDAs as a reason not to answer questions about the project. When it comes to why the secrecy, there's an LLC that's kind of done all of the land dealing around this. So we don't even know who the end user is going to be for this data center. So, it's kind of trying to protect whatever this larger entity is that is going to eventually be using the data center, whether it be Meta or Google, whichever of these large tech companies will eventually use the center. They're obviously trying to kind of shield their identity this early in the process.
Yeah, and one of the things that jumped out at me about this is just the sheer size of this center. 4.5 million square feet, 700 acres of wooded landscape. I think what 100 acres of which has to be clear cut, and then 18 buildings, each the size of a Walmart supercenter.
Yeah, huge, huge development. And you're talking about an area that's fairly rural. So, like you mentioned, this is on the proposed site is on 700 acres of completely wooded land. There are wetlands as well on this property. And so we know that at a minimum, 100 acres of that is going to have to be cut down for the building of these huge facilities. So, like you said, 18 buildings, each the size or larger than a Walmart supercenter, all in the backyards of these folks who, have lived a pretty rural lifestyle up until now. So yeah, the scale of this facility is something bigger than, many of the developments we see even in Birmingham, which is not far away from this location.
And it's possible this center will use more power than all the residences in Birmingham.
That's right. So the projection that they've given for the energy consumption for this facility, the lawyers for the land company, is 1,200 megawatts. So if you do the calculations, that's around 90 times the amount of energy that Bessemer, which is the closest city, uses all of their residents in a year. And it's about 10 times the amount of energy used by all of the residences in Birmingham each year. So you're talking about a massive increase in demand for energy. We looked at Alabama Power, which is the monopoly utility here, at what their peak load is usually. And if this facility went online at capacity tomorrow, it would be about 10% of their total energy output would be going to this single facility.
Yeah, and I think you said it might be the largest water user in the state.
It could be. So we're not entirely sure what the method of cooling will be. So all of these large data centers have to be cooled somehow, and most of them use water or either a combination of water and some kind of coolant for their cooling system. So we don't know what the water impact will be yet. They haven't provided an estimate for that, but there are other examples in states like Georgia where water pressure is going down for residents. You turn on your faucet and no water comes out because the data center that's just been built next door is using all of the water. So that's another concern for all of these residents living around this proposed site.
Right. And so far, there's been no talk of renewable energy in terms of powering this data center. And that's interesting because while solar is cheaper than a coal or natural gas, um, Alabama has some of the highest electric rates in the country and one of the lowest solar build outs in the country. Oh, and Alabama as a state has no, like most of the red states in the country, has no statewide emissions reductions goals. So this data center is kind of shaping up to be a climate bomb.
Yeah, that's right. Like you mentioned, we don't have emissions goals in Alabama. The energy consumption and the water, one of the things we point out in the story is Alabama also doesn't have a water plan. So if you're a company in Alabama, you can pull as much water as you want from the ground, groundwater from an aquifer without having to even get a permit for it. So when it comes to all of the aspects of either the energy, the water that this facility is going to use, there are a lot of questions that are unanswered, but one thing we know is it's going to use a lot of all of these resources.
Yeah, yeah. So in doing this piece, you spoke to a dozen residents. You obviously spent a lot of time reading court records and corporations records to figure out like who was actually behind the center. But I also noticed one of the things you brought to bear here was your drone. You had some beautiful drone photography over this sort of pine forest where this thing is going to go at the top of the story. Talk a little bit about what you think your drone photography adds to your journalism.
Sure. So in this project and in a lot of projects, it's kind of useful for readers to be able to see what we're talking about, right? So when you think about 700 acres of wooded land, you may have some concept of what that would look like, but it's really striking to see, from the air, this is all of the land that's going to have to be clear cut for this project. So for a story like this, or we do a lot of stories, for example, on pollution, et cetera, if you can get up over, an Alabama power facility that has a unlined coal ash pond and show people what that coal ash looks like and show, for example, its proximity to a river or to a lake or to a water supply, those are ways that, it just allows people to process more viscerally, the risks involved and what could be lost in projects like this. Like, for example, this 100 acres that's we know for a fact is going to have to be clear cut for the construction of this project. So it's just another way for us to have the impact of these projects kind of sink into people and give them a kind of visual to help them do that.
Yeah, yeah. Lee, thanks so much for joining me this morning.
Of course, glad to be here.
And thanks to all of you for reading and for supporting our work at Inside Climate News.